Larry, we're good to go? Good to go. Okay. We're the only thing between us and dinner is the final speaker, but I'll tell you what, he's worth it. Patrick Murphy was appointed as the 32nd Undersecretary of the Army and Chief Management Officer by President Barack Obama on January 4th, 2016. He has been deeply involved in civil-military affairs and civil-military divide for quite a while. And he served as the first Iraq War veteran elected to the U.S. Congress representing the 8th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. While there, he served in the Armed Services, Select Intelligence, and Appropriation Committees. He's a third-generation military veteran. He's a former collegiate hockey player and is a graduate of King's College, the University of Scranton ROTC program, and the Widener University Commonwealth School of Law. Besides teaching at West Point, he's lectured at Harvard, Stanford, the University of Chicago, the University of Pennsylvania, the U.S. Air Force Academy, and his alma maters. He's married and has 2 children, and I can tell you that it is, for me personally, a distinct pleasure to be able to introduce Patrick. Patrick and I have known one another and worked together for probably about 10 years, and the first time I met him and the first thing we worked on was the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the U.S. military. And Patrick was one of the few members of Congress willing to stand up and say it's the right thing to do to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And he was the loudest, clearest voice on this issue that ultimately brought equality and dignity to those serving in our military who were gay and lesbian, and strengthened our military in my judgment. But I've known him for 10 years. I've known him to be a stand-up guy, a great intellect, and a great friend. So it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Patrick Murphy. Patrick.
General, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and it's great to be here back at William & Mary. What a wonderful campus. We actually have congressional retreats here, so I've been here several times on that way with my wife. Colonel Wilkinson, sir, thanks for being here, and thanks for your friendship throughout the years. And Dennis is right. We go back, when I first met when I was in the U.S. Congress talking about this issue, and I had the great opportunity to serve on the Armed Services Committee, and then the Intelligence Committee, and then also the Appropriations Committee. So I'm going to give my remarks and focus it mostly on the all-volunteer force, but I'm going to spend some time on question and answer if there's other things that you'd like to ask. But sir, I appreciate you mentioning the fact that I did write the bill that repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was the Murphy Amendment. A lot of folks did ask me about that. They said, well, why did you write it? I only won my first race by 0.6%. I was outspent by $3 million, and I still won in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Full disclosure, this is not a political speech at all. I am a Democrat. I'm a conservative Democrat. It's called a Blue Dog Democrat. My wife is Republican, so I have a mixed marriage. But a lot of folks did ask me during that time, said, why did you feel so passionately about it? We had our first hearings in 13 years on it, and I was passionate about it when I was a professor at West Point. I taught constitutional law there to firsties, seniors about to go into our military. And when you're in uniform, you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And on day one, when I taught con law, talking about the principles, the fundamental principles of what our nation, the blueprint of our country is our Constitution, and what that means about individual rights and separation of powers and equality for all men and women. And I remember, I was this young captain. I had been in Airborne Squire Assault School. I was getting ready for Ranger School. And I was there right after 9/11. I was there, unfortunately, when 9/11 happened. But I remember we had the general counsel from the Pentagon come in, and he was talking to all the faculty members, and there was about 300 of us. And I raised my hand and said, "Sir, now that we're a nation at war, we're thinking about repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, since we need all the men and women we can." And he basically looked at me. He's like, "Why do you think we should, Captain?" Like Captain, and I'm like, I was like, "Actually, sir, we should." I said, "We desegregated our army in the middle of the Korean War, when half our country was still segregated. The military's been an agent for social change." I said, folks in my generation, with all due respect, sir, don't care what your sexual orientation is. They just care if you do your job. And he said, well, why don't you write me a memo and I'll take a look at it. And so then all weekend I spent writing this memo in my little office at West Point. I sent it to him, and then I got a form letter back, basically like why it's constitutional, which was not my argument, you know. But at any rate, but one of my, you know, in the military, you get all these additional assigned duties. So one of them was that I had to interview young Americans who wanted to come into the Army, especially the Army JAG Corps, to go and interview them before they go in front of a board. And I remember being at Columbia University in New York, and there's a big stop sign, about a 2-story high stop sign, "Stop discrimination now, get off our campus, Army." So I'm there in my uniform and, you know, what I call a lot of bling bling there. And I went up to the protest. I said, hey, I appreciate the sign. I said, I just want you to know, you know, I think you're kind of barking up the wrong tree. I said, I absolutely agree with you. I said, I teach common law at West Point, gave him kind of, you know, I said, but it's the Congress of your Congress that actually put that law in place. We just have to execute the laws that are given to us. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, but keep fighting. Like, so listen, I have a different perspective, I think, or unique, I should say, in that I was a combat veteran, 82nd Airborne Division. Prior to that, I served with the 25th Infantry Division. So I've done 2 deployments after 9/11. My brother has done 2 deployments after 9/11. My father and his uncle served, one in Vietnam, one during Vietnam. I'm named after a Vietnam veteran who was killed in the line of duty. His name was Patrick Ward. You know, so being a professor, being a combat soldier, being a congressman, when I left Congress, I had a TV show up at 30 Rockefeller Center talking about national security issues and veterans policy. I had the general on at that time. Unfortunately, he has a face for radio, but he's a great guy, and he's a great interview. I have to bust your chops, sir. I'm only kidding. His wife Conley would disagree. And then obviously my most recent role of being the COO of the Army. And it's an incredible organization. So, you know, you look at the Army, specifically all the services, but the Army and the Marine Corps especially, I would say, because they're the land forces, they're the land components. And my brother's an Air Force officer. My dad was in the Navy. But the Air Force and Navy, they man their equipment. The Marine Corps and the Army, we equip the man and the woman. So it's a different philosophy, and we're in the people business. So that's why this issue is so incredibly important. So if I can just begin to set the tone, I mean, I was sitting at the Williamsburg Inn, and I was sitting there thinking, all right, what am I going to talk about? And I couldn't help but think, just a few days ago was the anniversary of one of my personal heroes, and Pat Tillman, and his death. And you look at Pat Tillman, and you know, we reflect about his life. And here's a guy who had it all. Just signed a contract, millions of dollars, playing safety for the St. Louis Cardinals. Arizona Cardinals. And he gave it up to go enlist in the Army 8 months after 9/11, after the season was over. Him and his brother. And then gave the ultimate sacrifice. And I was trying to think of other folks of that ilk that had served during his time, because if you look back in history, you know, World War II, we had Elvis, Joe DiMaggio. In Vietnam, we had Rocky Blyer, who went on, you know, Pittsburgh Steelers, tonight's NFL draft. I am not speaking until 8 o'clock. Don't worry, you'll be way out of here by then. But to think about that, you know, not a lot of folks that serve that kind of level, whether in sports or entertainment, come join the military, because it's for other folks. I thought about the announcement today that 2 of our special operators were killed in Afghanistan. I thought about the president's call that he said in my old unit, the 82nd Airborne Division, 1,500 more troops additional troops into Afghanistan. And I thought about Solomon Bayan. Solomon was a specialist in the United States Army. I served with him. He was not a citizen of the United States of America. In the longest wars in American history, soon to be almost 16 years, we've asked not just less than 1% of Americans to serve, we've actually asked about 100,000 non-citizens to serve. People like Solomon It was one of the 19 paratroopers I served with that never made it home. You know, only 26% of the folks in our country could even serve in the military because you have to be physically fit. You have to have character. If you have a felony, there's no waivers for that anymore. And you have to want it. You have to volunteer. And as we reflect during these longest wars in American history, and that's why I so appreciate this conference and the fact that a lot of you were here all day, is the fact that most Americans, this is an academic exercise. This is theoretical. And not to steal the title of your book, but it's not their sons and daughters. You know, in politics, you learn that demographics are destiny. You know, I had a great buddy I served as a professor with at West Point. He went back home to Missouri to run. You know, I had just won this race. He was a Green Beret. He was an Oxford Scholar. He was awesome. He raised more money than I did. He went back home. He lost 2-1. And here I'm a guy that I went to Bucks County Community College. I went to a 4-year Catholic college at ROTC when there was only 3 of us. Cadets at the whole school of 2,200 students. And I was very blessed to win, and a person like that wasn't, but the demographics weren't in his favor. I joked he ran as a conservative Democrat. His name was Tommy Sowers. Hopefully you won't be upset if I tell his story. But he ran back at home in Missouri. It was Rush Limbaugh's district. And afterwards I joked with him. I said, Tommy, you could be Jesus Christ, but if you're a Democrat, you cannot win in that district. And I'm Catholic, so that's not, you know. In fact, I'm very Catholic. My mother was a Catholic nun. She was an IHM nun, which is Immaculate Heart of Mary. Luckily for me, she left the convent, otherwise I would not be here. But I will always be disappointed because I'm the youngest of 3, and I'm not a parish priest, and I was like the last hope that she would have someone in the clergy. But I say those things because this is not an academic exercise. You know, you look right now, there's 330 million Americans. And it's less than 3 million. It's the 1% that serve. You look at, again, almost 16 years in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and we've asked less than 1% of Americans to serve in the longest wars in American history. And they came, as the general mentioned earlier in his speech, they come from families like mine. They come from basically what I refer to as super patriots, folks that come from a military background. And even though my dad did 3 years and got out and was a police officer for 22 years, you know, it was ingrained that public service to give back to your country. So when I look at these young men and women, and when I was in the Pentagon and I'm helping, you know, one of the senior leaders of the Army, and I'm looking at this, and I'm saying, you know, we are in a people business. The Army, the United States Army, recruits more millennials to its organization than any other organization in the world. Almost 130,000 a year. Over 60,000 in active duty, a little over 60,000 in a reserve component. Most folks don't realize that in the Army, unlike the other services, more of our soldiers are actually in the reserve component. We have more soldiers in the reserves and National Guard than actually on active duty. 54% to be exact. And those citizen soldiers do come, you know, they're serving and they're twice the citizen. They have their day jobs during the week and then they serve. I'm not going to try and break any news here, and this is off the record, this part of this speech, but you look at a company like Johnson & Johnson, Alex Gorski's going to have an announcement pretty soon when it comes to policies with veterans for his company. Be a real leader. Alex Gorski happens to be a West Point graduate, former Army Ranger himself. But that company has put a stake in the ground saying we want to be a thought leader. We want to be one of the true leaders in corporate America that are answering the call on how we treat our veterans who deploy but are still part of the J&J family. So that announcement will happen within the next, let's say, 7 days. So when you look at these issues, and the one thing, you know, that I did want to bring up is the fact that you send these young men and women to war, And we sit at this conference and we talk about an all-volunteer force. And most of the folks are out there. I was walking around earlier today and they're outside. And it's like, life goes on, and that's great. But I remember 2 years ago when they asked me to join the faculty at University of Chicago. I remember going to the University of Chicago, one of the best institutions in the country. They have about 6,000 students, about the same size as Notre Dame, which is 2 hours away. I'm at U Chicago teaching national security politics. And I'm going through faculty orientation. And I say, well, where's the ROTC building? And they said, well, we don't have ROTC. We haven't had it since World War I. And I'm like, you don't have cadets you don't have students that want to serve in the military? Like, no, there's not student interest. I started asking around and I actually have cadets that had to schlep to other colleges. Like I had to schlep to the University of Scranton, 20 minutes when I didn't have a car. So it was me and my roommate, so whoever we were dating at the time, we usually borrowed some girl's car, to go up to military science class. But I say that because there is this disconnect, and it is a broader picture of the civilian-military gap, or civ-mil drift, or what some people say, the civ-mil divide in our nation. I remember when I had this TV show before I joined the faculty, I had Tim Kaine on. I'm a big fan of Senator Tim Kaine of the great Commonwealth of Virginia. And I had Senator Kaine on, and we talked about the AUMF, the Authorization for Use for Military Force. And to a lot of folks, and I had him on several times, that was an academic exercise. And he was pounding the table against the president of his own party and against his own colleagues in the Senate and the Congress, saying, we need to do an AUMF when it comes to Syria. This is not part of the 2002 or 2003 AUMF. And he's pounding the table. Remember, I asked him, I said, sir, do you think more Democrats would be up in arms if a Republican got in there? And he said, yeah, they would be. It's part of the partisan nature of our government. So what happened just a few months ago when Donald Trump was the commander-in-chief? And he lobs missiles into Syria. Blows things up, it's good for TV. What did the Democrats do? The same Democrats that didn't demand an AUMF when it was President Obama as the commander-in-chief are saying, hey, Trump can't do that. He can't lob missiles into Syria. We didn't sign on for that. We need a new AUMF. When we have hundreds of soldiers in Syria and Marines. That's the one thing that ticks me off about my time in politics and being American and loving my country, and that I see the hypocrisy on both sides of the aisle. I see folks who just say what's good and what will get them pressed, but aren't true. The same thing when you see, and again, I'm not trying to talk politics, but the tax policy, what was presented yesterday, but yet it's going to explode the national debt to folks who care about the national debt. And they're going to blow it without it being paid for. I was a Blue Dog Democrat. I believe we should amend the Constitution for balanced budgets. But when they're in charge, it doesn't apply to them. The rules don't apply. And we have this principle in our Constitution and our society that it's called the rule of law. That means no one is above the law. And I think when you look at why the ratings of the members of Congress are so bad, historically low, in fact, lower than used car salesman. So I usually don't like that part of my bio to say I was a U.S. Congressman, but I'm actually honored to serve. But yet that's one of the reasons. It's because they say one thing and do another, depending on the circumstances. It is what it is. And you also look at it, we have the least amount of members of Congress that are veterans. In the 70s, of every 5 members of Congress, 4 out of every 5 were veterans. Now it is less than 1 out of every 5 are veterans. So, frankly, for most of them, the overwhelming majority of them, it's not their sons and daughters that have skin in the game. And frankly, it is an academic exercise. I thought, in the general's remarks and that op-ed that him and Colonel Wilkinson just did recently, We talked about the fiscal constraints. If you look at just the, we're in a people business and recruiting and what that means, and to put 9,000 recruiters out there to bring in 120-some thousand millennials a year, having brick and mortar recruitment centers, or what we call Army career centers. The cost of that, the cost of TV commercials, we spend over $200 million a year in TV commercials, media. When you look at that, when you look at the sheer numbers of that, and you look at 20 years from now, the fiscal constraints of an all-volunteer force, if we continue the glide path that we're on. And again, our soldiers, now I'll tell you, when I served in Iraq, my private first class, my gunner, his name was Juan Arvello. He joined the Army. He made, in Iraq, he was making $19,000 a year. It's private first class. And he thought he was the richest man in Baghdad because he got tax-free money. And he joined the Army thinking that he just got clothed, trained, and fed. He didn't know you were going to get paid. He grew up, he never knew his father. His mother didn't speak any English. His nickname was RV. RV went on to go to West Point, where he met his wife, and is now about to graduate from law school. I mean, that's the American dream. But these soldiers aren't getting paid. I mean, this isn't saying they're going to be making more, even the average what the American family is going to make. This is just saying the current glide path you're on. So you might say, well, okay, well, it's a budget, and we'll just take care, we won't do the acquisitions, we won't do new weapon systems. And it's like, well, wait a second. We send these men and women in harm's way. We tell their moms and dads that we are going to give you everything you need to go and do your job and hopefully make it home okay. We're going to make it that it's not a fair fight, that they will have the technical and tactical advantage over our enemies. And so when you look at the all-volunteer force and the fiscal constraints on that, are you going to compromise the acquisition systems? Are you going to compromise the fact that it won't be a fair fight for these young men and women? That's a real-life question we have to ask ourselves, of who's going to serve and what that means for the broader system. And also what it means when you look at these soldiers and they come home. I will tell you, I will never forget when I joined the Army. I was at community college. I met a girl, I dated her, but then I went away to college, and I was a hockey player, and I was on the dean's list. I was doing well, but I joined the Army ROTC, and I was 19, and I went home to visit her dad and her mom, and I was at the house, and I was telling him how I just joined the Army, and he said, this is back in 1993. And I will never forget, her father says to me, Patrick, why would you join the Army? And I said, well, sir, I want to serve, and I'm going to be an Army officer. I'm going to make $27,000 a year when I become a second lieutenant. And I'm going to lead men and women, 40 in a platoon. And he's like, but Patrick, you don't have to serve. He's like, you're in the dean's list. And I said, well, sir, I'm hoping actually to earn a scholarship. I don't even have a scholarship yet. I just joined, I contracted, and it was like a foreign concept. I remember going away, to Fort Knox, Kentucky, where I got to go for summer training, and then the next summer to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I remember both summers I was dating a different girl at the time, and they both broke out with me when I was gone. And I came, I got like early training on the Dear John letters, without, which was easy because I'm a college student who was going back. It wasn't like I had a wife and kids, and I saw that, unfortunately, in real life in combat. And I remember seeing folks that, when 9/11 happened, they were the first ones to reach out and say, thank God that you're serving. I was like the connection. It was like I was like the pet that they want to touch. Like, thank God you're serving. Be safe. My best friend lost his girlfriend, soon to be fiance, in the World Trade Center. And she was murdered that day, and her father was murdered. They both worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. And I remember he wanted to join the Army, and I was advising him, this is what you should do. He's going to enlist because he didn't have his college degree. He was my best friend growing up. He's still my best friend. And I remember his brother grabbed me after the memorial service for his girlfriend. And he says, if you let my brother join the military, we're gonna fight. My brother's not gonna go serve. Another person just recently just grabbed me and they said, I'm so proud my daughter's serving. She has a 4-year ROTC scholarship. But I changed my mind. I don't want her to serve anymore with this commander-in-chief. And I will tell you, and again, this is not a political speech, but I will tell you that when you join our Army, when you join our military, you don't take an oath to support and defend you take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. You don't take allegiance to I mean, there's a chain of command and he's the commander-in-chief or she's going to be the commander-in-chief, but you serve for the men and women that you serve with on your left and your right. But who we're asking to serve is a valid question. The general and I have a disagreement. I know he is of the Congressman Charlie Rangel school that every American should serve in the military, or that we should have a draft. I'm sorry, that there should be a draft. And I always say, hey, our military is the most well-respected profession, and not just in America, but the world, but part of that is because these men and women want to be there for the most part. Now, they might have, some fiscal reasons why they got into it, but I question, if someone's drafted, what that means as far as the quality of service. But these considerations on the fiscal constraints of the bonuses, on the constraints of who we're asking, these super patriots that we're asking to serve, that come from military families. You look at Blue Star Families. Blue Star Families is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. They do a report every year. 78% of military recruits come from military families. 78%. You ask current military families, the majority of current military families would not recommend military service to their sons and daughters. So just look, remember I started this by saying demographics are destiny. We're asking less than 1% to serve. Of that 1%, less than 1% that are serving, 78% come from military families. More than half of current military families would not recommend service for their sons and daughters. It's not looking good. Now you probably ask yourself, well, why is that? Yeah, it's a tough job, it's a tough profession, but you get to jump out of airplanes and helicopters and do cool stuff, but part of it's the reception. If you showed the average American a picture of a homeless person, you ask him, it's the first word that comes out of your mouth, studies will show that person says, that's probably a veteran. Well, most homeless are not veterans. There's over 40,000 veteran service organizations out there. These nonprofits, they raise money. How do they raise money? They talk about what they do, how veterans are in need, and there used to be some organization, it's different leadership now, so it's not the case now, but for a lot of years, they would show for only $19 a month, you could help these poor veterans. Just, come on, $19 a month, you can help these poor veterans that have no one. It's like we're puppies. It was not helpful. It was the victimization of our men and women in the military, the American veteran. When the fact of the matter is, veterans are more likely to be employed than non-veterans. Veterans are more likely to start a small business than non-veterans, and for that small business to be more successful. Veterans are more likely to be C-suite executives in Fortune 500 companies than non-veterans. By the numbers, not by the percentages. You get some great American companies, like FedEx, started by a veteran. Nike, started by a veteran, Bill Bowerman, who was Phil Knight's track coach at the University of Oregon. Phil Knight started Nike in the back of a van. It's the largest sports apparel company in the world. Bill Bowerman served with the 10th Mountain Division in World War II, got the Silver Star, basically went home to be a high school track coach, then got the job at the University of Oregon, and got to know Phil Knight because he was a student athlete. You heard me mention Alex Gorski earlier. He's the current CEO of Johnson & Johnson, the largest healthcare company in the world. Our veterans are not victims, but oftentimes that's the perception out there, which is not helpful. You know, we doubled down in my time in the Pentagon, again, I just left in January, on the Soldier for Life program. We changed when you become a soldier. Before is when you were a trainee, you're on a bus, when you get off that bus for base training, you were a soldier. Now you're not a soldier until you earn that black beret at the very end. And Soldier for Life means that you are a leader of character for a lifetime of service. Yes, you might serve 3 years, you might serve 20 years. But you are expected to be a leader of character for a lifetime of service to this nation. And part of that Soldier for Life was making sure that transition part is more aggressive. Now, that was a little controversial because there's a lot of folks that said to me, hey, Secretary, you know, I don't want to lose this Joe 6 weeks out or 2 months out. I want to use him until the last possible minute. And I'm a numbers guy. And I said, do you know how much we pay in unemployment? Just the Army. Because when our soldiers leave, yes, it's the VA and the Department of Labor that kind of should take the lead, but do you know who pays the bill when they don't get jobs? 5 years ago, the Army paid $550 million in unemployment for UCX, unemployment benefits for our soldiers. $550 million. That would be a whole new brigade combat team. So what we did with the Soldier for Life program, again, also to change the perception out there, but to make sure that these soldiers had programs that they were 6 months or 6 weeks out, they can go to training, they can go in interviews, give them permissive TDY. We made sure that that handoff, that it wasn't the last minute, that they were doing resume courses, they were seeing what they were able to do, they were taking tests, and we were partnering with not just the VA and the Department of Labor, but also with private industry, nonprofits out there. Last year we saved from the $550 million mark, we spent $330 million less last year. Now, some of that was lesser troops, some of that was improving job market, but I would say to you, it was that Soldier for Life program and initiative that now the Marine Corps and Navy and Air Force are trying to do, replicate. And I'm going to open up for questions, but I want to mention a couple other things real quick. I know there was a speaker earlier about the way ahead and service year. The way ahead, as far as if you ask me, my philosophy about the all-volunteer force is that I think there should be an expectation that every American serves in our nation. They serve either in the military or in their community. I'm a huge proponent of it. And I'm a huge proponent of it because you look at veterans coming out of our military. Veterans, as you heard me earlier, they're more likely to vote. They're more likely to be employed. They're also more likely to vote in elections, no matter what their political persuasion is. They're more likely to coach a Little League or be pastors in their churches, to be civic assets in their communities. So whether it's AmeriCorps is a great program. About 70,000 young Americans, basically about 76,000 to be exact, are volunteers. They get stipends. You know what we spend as far as America for those 76,000? About $1.1 billion a year. Put in perspective, our Army, last year was a $150 billion budget. So, but we have 1.3 million people in the Army, 1 million soldiers, 300,000 civilians. But that 1 million soldiers, as you heard me earlier, more than half are in the National Guard or Reserves. You look at things like the FEMA Corps under DHS that just was initiated a few years ago for responses. You know, I always say the answer that let young Americans serve, but allow them to do it and give them the tools, give them the opportunities to serve. And again, it's not just with veterans, but regular Americans, so they could serve in the FEMA Corps or they could join Team Rubicon with a lot of our veterans populations. What I think is interesting there is 92% of returning veterans want to go back and serve in their communities. 92%. So if we had that type of culture of that everyone serves, everyone has skin in the game, you wouldn't see so many people flick their cigarette butts out their window when they're driving, or litter, or look the other way when they know that someone's in distress. The other stat I want to share, of that, 64% of Americans support that type of mandatory service. So when John Bridgman spoke earlier, I mean, I'm a big fan of what the Aspen Institute and what they're trying to do. Previously, General McChrystal, the Franklin Project. I think it could be a game changer for America. So I didn't want to just give you my thoughts about the all-volunteer force without any type of solution. But I do think that's partially the way ahead here. But I began my remarks, and I want to end my remarks by saying thank you to every single one of you for being here. I know it's a nice day, and I could be doing other things, but the fact that you're here because you love your country and you're trying to make it better and you're trying to have these kind of conversations and these debates to see what the best solution is for our nation, I think speak volumes for the love of your country. So thank you so very much. I'd be honored to answer any questions that you have. I'm sorry I went a little bit long. I apologize. Went longer than I thought. Do you mind me just telling me what your name is and if you're...
My name is Norris Childs from Philadelphia, and I do have an easy question for you. Having been in the elected seat, how does your constituency reach you and talk to you about things like all-volunteer force, military strategy, what's going on there, whether they like it or not, and how do you listen to them and respond to that?
Yeah, thanks. And the Eagles had the 14th pick in the draft tonight, so I'm hoping we get a good defensive back. But listen, I am one of those folks. I mean, I was tweeting today, and I was putting it on Facebook that I was going to be here tonight and some other things. But I'm on social media a lot because I think and it's me. And my handle is at Patrick Murphy PA, and for Twitter, also the same handle for Facebook. So I did that. I would talk to them. I would obviously speak to folks who I would go to enlistment ceremonies and have soldiers who were going in, whether it was whatever branch of service. Sadly, I didn't get a lot of questions when I was a member of Congress. And it used to bother me, to be quite honest with you. Most Americans have no idea that tonight, there will be over 100,000 soldiers in over 120 countries, foreign countries. Over 100,000. You know, I know Dr. Blevich spoke earlier. He had a great piece a couple weeks ago, basically like, why the hell are we still in Yemen? Isn't that the Atlantic? Or why the hell are we in Yemen? Not even still, but why are we in Yemen? You know, what's our national interest there? Some other things. But, I mean, most folks don't, because it's not their sons and daughters, not their nieces and nephews. Because they don't have skin in the game, they don't ask those questions. It was more, you're going to take away my Social Security, or you're going to do this, you can do that. You know, and I'm not saying they don't care about it, because they do care about it. If you look at national polls, and the top two issues is always the economy, and they flip, but it's the economy and national security / terrorism. So they care about it. They just don't, you know, I think they care about it, but they don't care as deeply as they probably should, because like I said, it's not their sons and daughters. So. Sure.
Really have enjoyed your talk. My name is Ed Chambers. I'm a veteran, a draftee back in the day. I have another political question for you. Should not the American public be required to pay an increase in taxes in order to properly fund and maintain our military service and the worldwide effort that our military people have to take?
Sir, thanks for your service, and my answer is yes, they should. But since 2011, since the longest wars in American history in Afghanistan and Iraq, we've just put on the credit card. It's added to our national debt. Both parties, both presidents, both Congresses been in power at the same time, and there's been no real effort to pay down the debt or to pay for the current wars that we're in. None, zero, nada. I remember being a member of Congress and we were debating the Iraq issue. I just won my first race. I won by 1,518 votes of the $250,000 that were cast in Bucks County. And I just won. I remember it was the debate about the Iraq war, and I said, I thought we should have a phased redeployment of our troops. I ran on that issue, and I talked about it, and a lot of people said, just talk about why Bush is wrong and why the congressman's wrong. You don't have to talk about why. And I said, that's what's wrong with this. I said, it's all right to fire somebody, but I want to tell you why I should be hired. I want to give them the ideas that I have. And then, I was called weak and, other things. But my point is that we passed what was then called the Iraq De-Escalation Act. I co-authored it with then Senator Barack Obama. They said it was never going to pass because of the timeline, and timelines were not cool. I was weak on defense because that was the timeline. I said, in the Army, we have timelines for everything. When you go to the bathroom, when you go to chow. I said, they said, it's never going to pass. We got to pass in the House. And the Senate. It was me, then Senator Obama, and then the guy Mike Thompson, Congressman Mike Thompson, who was a sergeant NCO in Vietnam, 173rd Airborne Division. We passed in the House. The Senate was vetoed by President Bush. And then another blank check bill just came up. And we were debating it. I remember it was 10:30 at night. And there's out off the floor of the House, they have a Democratic cloakroom and a Republican cloakroom. We can go and get like a sandwich, soda, et cetera. And then there's 10:30 at night, and members of Congress were pissed that we're still there at 10:30 at night. And they're like, can you believe we're still, and it was there, and they're like, can you believe we're still here debating this issue? It's 10:30 at night, can you believe this is not right? And I said, well, that's one way to look at it. The other way, as I look at it, that I said, we have 100,000 soldiers in Iraq, and they're actually not going to bed tonight. And tomorrow when they wake up, they're going to serve in 138-degree heat like I did. And they're getting shot at, and they're getting mortared at night at their forward operating bases. So I think staying until past midnight wouldn't be too much to ask, especially when you're getting paid $170,000 to be here. But that's just me. So I didn't make a lot of friends in the cloakroom that night. But I also, was taught by my dad. He said, Patrick, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I remember that vote. I voted against the blank check. And I remember, you have consultants and you have media people in there. The consultants, with the gray hair, and they were like, I was 33 as a freshman congressman. They said, Patrick, this is one of those votes where you just hold your nose. I know you don't want to vote for it, but you got to vote for the blank check because this is the 30-second ad that you don't support the troops, that you voted. And my chief of staff and they were like, basically, like it was a come to Jesus. They were like, you cannot vote no. You just got to suck it up. You got to vote yes for the war funding. And I said, well, I voted for the war funding, but when it was tied to the timeline, bring the troops home so we could refocus on Afghanistan. And I said, I'm not going to do it. And I said, part of the problem is, that's what people miss when they get down here. And I said, you know what's more important than Election Day? Judgment Day. And I said, I'm not going to compromise my principles. And I said, if you all want to look for another office to work in, if you think I'm going to lose next year, I said, I'm standing on my own 2 feet, I'm voting no. And if you don't like it, I'll write a nice letter of recommendation, move out. I won my next re-election by 55,000 votes. I beat a Marine colonel, who was a millionaire, personally recruited by the president. And again, I'm friends with that guy now, and it's just not, but. And then when I did lose my race in the Tea Party wave of 2010, 2 years after that, I lost by 6 points when the average loss of a Democrat was 26 points. And I was the second Democrat in 100 years to represent Bucks County. So I look at that as that, to me, as a Blue Dog Democrat, I care about the budget because I have a daughter, Maggie Murphy, who's 10, and Jack Murphy, who's 7. And, a lot of folks just say, well, just put it in a credit card, don't worry about it. And that's not right. That's not how our country did things. And it's not that hard to ask, to pay your own way as you move forward. So, last question, is that all right, Dennis? And I'll be quiet. And,
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your remarks, too. Appreciate your comment.
Oh, thank
My name is Con Zefterson. I served in the Navy. And based on what you said, and based on a lot of the statistics we heard today, how do you see this force in the future? Where do we go from here? So
the
in
military
5
force,
years,
or if it's a service, like a service corps for, I mean,
No.
I talk about that service as meaning service for every American. Again, I'm not saying if you don't serve, you go to jail. I mean, I just don't think you should get the tax benefits that everybody else gets, like the cheap home loans, cheap student loans. You know, I think that's how you could use the fiscal advantage. And
No, my question is, how do you see the military force unfolding? If the demographics are not looking good, then what does it look like? What does the military look like in 5 years or 10 years?
I appreciate your question. I have concerns. Before I became the secretary, I was acting secretary for the first 5 months of the year of 16. But before I took office, it was confirmed by the Senate, et cetera. Someone said to me, they're like, I don't know if you, and I didn't say this earlier, but the Army had not met their recruitment goals in 5 years, meaning for all active duty reserves, National Guard. One of the three didn't make it, for 5 years in a row. And I said, this is going to be, we're going to make it this year. And they're like, it doesn't look good. We pulled all the strings and levers for the last one. And I said, well, we got to push. And I said, we got to push on social media. And I changed the policy. We had an 18% increase in social media and some other things that we were doing. And I was aggressively talking about the Army as America's varsity team. So, I mean, no offense to the Navy, you guys are a great JV team, but but 5 years from now, I mean, demographics are destiny. I mean, you said what I said. I mean, I worry that, and again, I brought up Solomon Begang in the early, he's one of the 19 guys I served with that never made it home. I was literally helping him with his immigration paperwork in Baghdad. And I look at, we've had 100,000 of the 1.8 million that served in Iraq or Afghanistan. 100,000 of them, not less than 10%, but still, are non-citizens. They're trying to earn their citizenship. But I look at, I'm a student of history. I look at the Civil War. I mean, 20% of the Union forces in the Civil War were immigrants. Now, I'm not saying, we should fight future wars, but I will tell you, and the general and I talked about this earlier, what's going to change this, and make this, this would be a lot more prevalent of a conversation. Like the AUMF is now more conversation because Donald Trump's the commander-in-chief, and so Democrats care more about it now. It's like, well, that's great. And again, some Republicans were giving Obama a hard time. I mean, and again, it's politics. I mean, when Bill Clinton was the president, the Republicans were against serving us sending troops into Bosnia, for the most part. You forget Bosnia. I mean, I served in Bosnia. I was in Tuzla. Bosnia was worth ethnic cleansing in Europe since World War II, where Muslims were being killed on the side of the road because they were Muslim. And we stopped it because we put American soldiers and the Marines and sailors, et cetera, there, and we, basically, then the commander-in-chief Bill Clinton said, how many troops do you need? And we gave them the amount of troops and took care of business. But I worry about the demographics. I'm not going to, and I'm trying to do everything I can in my power that change the national narrative that veterans are civic assets. So I will, I'm working right now with the guy Jason Hall, who's the writer-director of the movie American Sniper with Bradley Cooper. There's a movie coming out this October 27th called Thank You for Your Service. It's based on a book. It's a pretty tough book about 3 soldiers from the 1st Infantry Division out of Fort Riley, Kansas. It's a great story. It's a story of brotherhood. But one of those soldiers comes back and he commits suicide. And the other 2 get treatment. You know that signature injuries of the Iraq-Afghanistan war, of my generation, is PTSD or PTS and traumatic brain injury. And it affects you. I was in that Amtrak crash last 2 years ago. I was lucky enough, 8 people were killed, and I was knocked unconscious. I came to. My train flipped over me. I was blessed to still be here. but I picked myself, before I picked myself up, I opened up my eyes. I mean, there was blood and debris all over the place, but I checked my arms and legs, they were there. But I pulled myself up, and I pulled myself up did a table, because the doors you couldn't get out, and I knocked the window out, and then I helped people get out. But then when I went, I thought it was fine. I didn't want to, I was knocked unconscious, and I thought I'd call my wife afterwards. I didn't get home till like 4 hours later, and my wife was ready to kill me because she found out by watching TV that I was on it. I was giving interviews there. I'm disheveled looking, and I said, "Babe, I texted you," and she goes, "No, you didn't. Let me see your," and I was like, "I swear," and I didn't, and that was not helpful for my marriage. First call is always to the wife. I'm okay, gotta go. But my point is that I had to go sit in a dark room for 4 days straight. I couldn't look at my phone. I couldn't watch TV. I mean, it's one of the paratroopers I had a team of 7 that I led. It's called a Bolt team, and of my team that I led, they all made it home to see their wives and their kids again. But the one soldier that was my NCOIC, he came home and the stuff that we saw, he's not here anymore. So, I work with the driver. I'm doing this for free because this movie is very important, and to me, it's probably going to be the defining moment of the Iraq-Afghanistan war, because it was. And I love American Sniper, but it was a little Hollywoodish. Bradley Cooper, he's pretty handsome dude, But this one is the true story of the caregivers back at home. And I just think changing the narrative to show veteran this way is something that we have to do also as a society. And I don't think you'll see more and more movies come out of it. You look at history of after, Vietnam, it took several years to make Apocalypse Now, Deer Hunter, et cetera. And so now you'll start to be seeing, more films like that, and hopefully they'll keep in mind about the narrative because of that civilian-military drift that's happened. So thank you for your service and for your question. General, thank you.
I mentioned in introducing Patrick that, in my judgment, he was a stand-up guy of high character. If there's anything that he said during that presentation that doesn't back that up, you need to get your hearing checked, or you have some other problem. But I'm delighted to call Patrick a friend and a colleague. In closing today, I genuinely thank all of you for being here all day. I hope that you got as much out of this day as I did. This is the kind of thing that we need to do to advance this dialogue. As we said all during the day, it's not going to be done in the halls of Congress or in the West Wing of the White House. It'll be done in forums like this. So thank you very much, and please put on your calendar 29 March 2018 will be at The Ohio State University. If you can't get up there, we will be podcasting it so you can be part of that dialogue, and we would look forward to having you, and look forward to it. Again, thank you very much. Have a safe trip, great evening, and God bless.